Since Holley, Terminator X has completely taken over the entire universe when it comes to entry-level engine management options for the LS platform, this year several other companies are essentially trying to target that same market. We've seen some new ECUs come out from HP tuners that we don't really know a whole lot about yet. I got hit with some Facebook ads today for Link ECU offering some LS specific packages as well. But the one that seems to be the most interesting and really targeting the Terminator X specifically is the new ECU from Haltech, and I believe it's called the Rebel. So in this video, we'll talk a little bit about my take on what I've seen and found so far.
Don't care.
We'll take a look at the specs, kind of compare it to what the Terminator X offers, and then we'll take a look at the software and kind of compare in that regard. Now, I'll be completely honest, I know next to nothing about Haltech. I've never really used it. I dug through the software for 10-15 minutes about an hour ago, and that's about the extent of my knowledge.
Dumb bitch.
But every single person I've ever talked to my entire life has sent me messages and questions about all of this, so it seems at least an interesting enough of a choice to dig into, see what it's all about. Now, since nearly every video on this whole channel is Holley EFI related, you even have a Holley EFI training course. Black Friday is right around the corner, so if you want early access to the Black Friday sale, click the link in the description and I can send you a notification once we get that ready to go. But ultimately, since I'm gonna make the assumption that a majority of the people watching on this channel are familiar with what Holley is, what Holley offers, we're gonna kind of look at this just from the Haltech standpoint and kind of compare in that regard. So right from the get-go, I wouldn't say that Haltech is just simply targeting the entry-level LS kind of crowd. I would say that they are very specifically targeting Holley Terminator X, and you can even see that in some of the marketing. And anytime you're coming out with a new product that's going to specifically try to compete with something else, you're obviously going to go out of your way to make it at least a little bit better. And the biggest setback with the Terminator X stuff is that we only have 4 inputs and 4 outputs. And with the Haltech, it does appear that we have a little bit more than that. So we'll get into the specifics on that here in a minute. Now, even though I think Haltech is specifically targeting the Terminator X crowd, I do still think there is enough of a difference between the two of these that it should be pretty easy for people to make a decision in which direction that they want to go. I think part of what has made Holley so popular, and I think they've done a really good job at this, is they've made an ECU that is extremely user-friendly and easy to navigate, easy to use, but at the same time, it's still very capable, and you can get it to do nearly everything that you want it to do. And once you take a look at the Haltech software, I would say that there's a lot of people that are not going to be able to catch on and be able to use that quite as easy as the Terminator X software. A lot of things are kind of pre-set up for you. Maybe even you don't have some adjustability of things within Holley. And with the Haltech, there's a lot more adjustability. And the adjustability can be a good thing if you know what you're doing, but if you're already intimidated by what the Terminator X offers, then it's just gonna be kind of that much worse for you. And with so much more adjustability within the software, I do think that there's the potential that, you know, these $1.99 Facebook group remote tunes might not be quite as popular with the Haltech stuff as, in theory, if somebody's gonna really go in and do a good job tuning one of these, it's probably gonna take a decent chunk more time. So already seeing what everybody's been talking about online between comparing these two ECUs, probably the number one thing is that people are commenting on the way Holley usually handles their tech support and the way that Haltech usually handles their tech support. And the size of these two companies is so drastically different that I don't think a lot of people take this into consideration. But I actually picked my dyno up from Haltech in Kentucky. Mainline is made in Australia and Haltech's an Australian company. So it was shipped to Haltech USA, went and picked it up. And when I was there, I think there was maybe 3 or 4 employees, and most of those guys were handling tech support. Basically with Haltech, it seems like you call, you talk to somebody, they may even log into your computer, and there's usually a bit more of an intimate experience with the tech support side of things. But on the flip side, Holley is doing so much volume that they probably have hundreds of tech support guys. So you might call, you might stand on hold for a long time, and it's just like anything else. If you call when it's not busy, you might get through quick, but if you call when it's super busy, you might have long wait times. Now, if this ECU takes off for Haltech and now they need to hire 700 more tech support people, then that whole thing might change. But as of right now, Haltech's a much smaller company, so you're probably gonna have like I said, a little bit more of an intimate experience if you do need some technical support or some help. So before filming this video, I actually thought about calling Haltech and just talking with someone directly, but I'd rather shove a 6-pack of grenades up my ass. I'm actually trying to go the rest of my life without ever talking on the phone. So I just did some digging online and talked with some friends and some other people I know that do Haltech. So any of you that went to PRI and spoke with Haltech firsthand, you might have some better knowledge of this than I do. So if I do get any of this stuff incorrect, it's just what I've found through the little bit of research that I've done. So don't come burn my house down if I say something incorrectly. All right, so here's kind of what we've come up with is this ECU, just like the Terminator X, is basically an ECU and an inexpensive harness to give you essentially a complete package for not a lot of money. It looks like the target price for this Haltech ECU and harness is going to be about $1,500, which if I remember, that's about where the Terminator X stuff started off. Maybe that was even a little bit cheaper, but I do know they've had some price increases over the years, so I'm not sure exactly where it is at price-wise now. Even though I deal with Holley all day, every day, I don't sell a lot of stuff, and ironically, I actually tried to order something from Holley yesterday, and since I don't do much volume, it appears that my dealer account's been shut down, so.
Ain't that a bitch?
Now, something to keep in mind with the Haltech is you're not going to get the 3.5-inch touchscreen display, so there's a little bit of the price difference there, but what you do get to set up your wizard and all that stuff is they're going to have apparently a phone app, and you can connect to the ECU wirelessly. Now, I have used some other ECUs in the past that have the same kind of wireless phone connectivity, and when it works, it's kind of cool, but it sometimes can be a huge pain when it doesn't work. Probably showing my age here, but I would prefer to actually shove a cable into the computer and connect that way, but as long as it works, should be cool. The upside is it should make doing updates a lot easier for a lot of people. I know with pulling the SD card out and clearing all the files and putting all the crap back on and reloading everything with the Terminator X, a lot of people really struggle with that. So if Haltech does this correctly, this could make that a lot easier. The Haltech ECU does not have automatic transmission control, which the Terminator X Max does. Now, if you look on Haltech's website, it says that the automatic transmission control is like coming soon or something along the lines of that, but looking at the ECU and the harness, it doesn't look like there's going to be provisions for it. So my assumption is that there's probably going to be a secondary box to add the auto trans control, which depending on how you want to look at it, could be kind of cool. So if you bought the ECU and you didn't need the auto trans control and you can just buy a box to add to it, that's a little bit nice, as to where if you buy a Terminator X and then you want to add the transmission control, then you have to essentially sell your Terminator X and buy the X Max. So the downside being that you're going to have a secondary box to mount if that's the case, even if that's how they're going to do it. So just something to keep in mind. The other thing, it doesn't matter if it's car parts or whatever, anytime somebody says that something's coming soon, you never really know what that means. That could mean coming soon in 6 weeks, or that could mean coming soon in 6 years. So I wouldn't probably jump on this if I wanted to do an automatic transmission until that functionality was actually available, because again, you might not have any idea how long you're going to have to wait for that. From my understanding, the Haltech is going to use the NSP software. It's going to have its own firmware for the ECU, which I believe is going to limit what the software is capable of doing, which makes perfectly good sense. And just like the Terminator X, I'm under the impression that the Haltech ECU is only going to give you the option to use a Bosch 4.9 sensor. So you're going to be using the same O2 sensor between the two. Now, what I'm not sure of is Haltech actually has CAN-based O2 modules. Like if you wanted to put 8 O2s on your car, or you want to do bank-to-bank O2, you can add the secondary modules to this ECU, which I don't understand for the life of me why Holley hasn't offered that yet. So it looks like you're going to have that functionality with the Haltech. Now, I'm not sure with those boxes if at that point you'd be able to run like an NTK sensor. I'm not familiar enough with Haltech's lineup to be able to let you know on that, but I think in the base configuration, I've been told it's going to be a 4.9 only. And given that the price is what it is, that makes perfectly good sense, because the NTK sensors are significantly more expensive. When I was at World Cup Finals just the other day, at Haltech's display, they actually had one of these systems laid out. They had the wiring harness and everything. And at first glance, I didn't even think that this was the ECU. I had heard that they had came out with an entry-level ECU, but this one looks just like their, was it the R3, R5? I don't know their part numbers and their systems, but it looks like the ECUs that has like the PDMs built into it. So I didn't pay a whole lot of attention at first, and then I kind of went back and looked at it. I'm like, oh wait, that is it. With that being said, it looks like it has a built-in PDM, but it doesn't. However, it does have the big power and ground wires for the battery going to the ECU. And again, to my understanding, the pre-configured things like the injectors, the coils, radiator fan, like those core items are going to be controlled directly from the ECU, meaning that you're not going to have any additional fuses or relays. So that is actually kind of a nice touch, just kind of simplifies things a bit. In the Holley harness that you buy, like they have fuse holders and relays that are just kind of dangling. So this will clean that up a little bit. One thing worth noting with the power cables, I'm not sure what size cables they're requiring you to run to the ECU to run all of this additional stuff, but hopefully they come with, or at least you can purchase secondary pre-crimped cables for these connections, as I've seen the way some of these guys crimp larger diameter wires. I mean, it looks like they use a butter knife and a sledgehammer. So hopefully they're going to offer something like that, so that way guys have decent connections there at the ECU. There's pretty much not a worse connection to make in the car than having a poor connection directly on the power and ground for the ECU. So one thing that is going to work in Haltech's favor here is that Haltech has been around since, hell, Haltech might have even invented the fuel injector. They've been around forever. So even though this is a new ECU for them, it's not a completely new ECU manufacturer altogether. Sometimes with that, there's almost always growing pains associated with that. So assuming they didn't really cheap out on the hardware within the ECU, the software should theoretically be pretty stable. And again, they've been making ECUs since the automobile was invented. So hardware theoretically should be good as long as they didn't cheap out. So I think we'd like to hope that it's going to be a pretty solid option right out of the box. And now another one of Holley's biggest advantages is that there is an endless amount of information available to you. Like I said, I have a full-blown course. There's 13,000 Facebook groups dedicated to Holley. Everybody uses Holley. Everybody's a dealer for Holley. Just there's so much more of it that I suspect it's going to be significantly easier to find the information that you're looking for without actually having to like call Haltech directly. I do know that I've seen some stuff from Haltech as far as like YouTube and videos and things like that. So there might be a little bit more support out there like that. I'm sure they have some forums if people still use those. There's probably some Facebook groups. They probably have all the same stuff. It's just rather than this much of it, there's going to be this much. So just the amount of information that is available with Holley is really, really good. You can always find whatever information it is you need, whether you need to talk with somebody or find it online or whatever. But at the end of the day, with Haltech, if you know they're closed and you can't talk to them directly, I just don't think you're going to find quite as much information. And with that being said, probably the easiest way for me to put the software differences kind of into perspective is the very first time I ever used Holley, I just simply plugged the ECU into the car and powered my way through it and was able to tune the car start to finish without having to call tech support, without having to look up any manuals. The exception of that being is I had to look up how to configure the boost control with CO2 and dome pressure sensor, but even tuning the boost control, like I didn't read any manuals, I just kind of figured it out. But looking at the Haltech software, a lot of it is pretty straightforward, but there is so much more in there, and some of the wording is a little bit different than what I'm used to. So I think that the learning curve with the Haltech is going to be significantly harder. And maybe harder isn't even the word, just it's going to take a lot more time to learn the ins and outs of it. I know a lot of people are kind of intimidated with the Terminator X software, and if kind of that's where you're at, if you looked at the Haltech software, it's going to be probably 10 or 20 times more complex, and there's just way more stuff. And one thing that I like about Holley that, especially if you're new to it, is that Holley is going to log every single channel. So that way, if you record a log of your car and you're not even sure what you're looking at, like all of the data is there and you can kind of go through it. As we're with the Haltech and a lot of other ECUs for that matter, you need to pick what channels you want to log ahead of time. So what's nice about that is you can choose the logging rate of each one of those channels. But if you don't log a channel and later you go back to review that log and you want to know what, you know, you want to watch whatever channel it is, if you didn't log it ahead of time, then it's just not going to be there. And sometimes that can be really annoying because you don't log certain channels because you don't necessarily think that you need them, but then when you do need them and they're not there, and that's kind of a bummer. So that's one thing I have always kind of liked about Holley, is it just logs every single channel. It can take a while to download the files from the ECU, but at least everything that you want is there. All right, let's take a look at some of the specs. Oh, we haven't talked about the harness yet. Everybody's familiar with Holley's harness. Now there are elements of this harness that are really kind of nice in comparison. And if you look here, you can see like these wires are kind of like looped. And this image is definitely taken from like the best angle and very specifically kind of laid out. There is a grommet on the firewall, which I thought was nice. Where this loom kind of ends, they have adhesive line heat shrink, which is nice. Some of the labels are kind of okay. Some maybe weren't quite as nice as some of the other ones. No big deal there. But the big difference is, looking at this image, it's probably, if you follow this back, it's probably actually hanging out right behind the ECU. But if you take kind of how this looks big and bulky on this heat shrink stuff here, and then you see like this looped up wire, there is just this big chunk like this big huge section where all the wiring looks like this, and it just looks like the wiring is just kind of like spaghettied all over the place. So I don't know if that was just simply a prototype and maybe the production versions will be a little bit nicer, but other than that one kind of bulky spot that I didn't think really looked that great, the rest of the harness looked pretty good. And I think adding the firewall grommet was a nice touch. And here's what I was talking about with the power and ground posts directly on the ECU. And I don't know if the case is metal or plastic. If it is metal, then that's obviously nicer than the Terminator X plastic case. All right, so for this, we're just gonna look directly at Haltech's website. So you can see here, this is specifically designed for the Gen 3 and 4 engines. So I don't know if this is just simply they only offer the harness for the Gen 3s and the Gen 4s, or if the actual ECU is just not gonna be configurable for other platforms. Now, I have had countless customers switch from small block Fords to LSs, and from LSs to Coyotes and everything else. So another advantage for the Terminator X is you can just keep the same ECU, get a different harness, and it's going to work on a bunch of different platforms. So as it sits currently with this, it looks like you're only going to be able to use it with an LS. So this is apparently the best, quickest, and easiest way to get your LS swap up and running. It's probably subjective, but I guess from a marketing standpoint, you can't say that it's the okayest way of getting your car up and running. This part here is pretty cool. That is going to work with the dashes as you would expect, but it's also going to work with the PDMs and all of the other CAN-based stuff that Haltech offers. So that's kind of going to give Haltech an advantage, I believe. I do know somebody using a smart wire with the Terminator X, but the smart wire is like twice the price of the ECU. So the way some of this is laid out, it makes it sound like there's more than there is, but basically we have 8 injectors, high impedance only, 8 coils, so same as Terminator X. We do have 5 low side outputs as opposed to the Terminator X that has just 4 altogether. And these dedicated ones, again, it puts the 3 there to make it look like there's more than there really is, but there is one user definable 12 volt output, which the Terminator X does not have. So it looks like we have 6 outputs total, giving you obviously 2 more than Terminator X. Same thing with the inputs. It's listing the dedicated ones as if they are kind of more than they are, since you can't use them for anything else. But if I am reading their terminology here correctly, it looks like we have 2 user definable. I'm guessing these are like 5 volt inputs, and then we have 4 pulse inputs, so like your digital inputs for like flex fuel and speed sensors. But then it also says it can be programmed for AVI. So again, I'm not familiar with Haltech's terminology, but I'm guessing that this means that we essentially have like 4 digital inputs, 2 5 volt inputs, or you can configure them all as 6 5 volt inputs. So again, it looks like we're gonna have 2 more than we do with the Terminator X. And to my understanding, you can run an expander box through the CAN to get more with this. Same thing kind of goes here. Oh yeah, see here it says LSU 4.9 only for the onboard, but you can use the expansion modules to run up to 10. So 1 per cylinder, and then an additional 1 per bank, 10 total. And then this ignition switch input, that's a little bit weird. I'm assuming this is just a 12 volt input to turn the ECU on. It's kind of weird that they would list that as an input. 1 CAN network, USB-C, and it does have the onboard Wi-Fi, which the Terminator X does not have. These two here, three here actually, are pretty advantageous here, as we have onboard data logging for the Haltech ECU, which we do not have onboard for the Terminator X. You have to do it through either the laptop or the SD card on the handheld, so that's a nice touch. And then there's an onboard 4-bar map sensor, so that's gonna save you 100, 150 bucks if you're a turbo guy using this ECUs. You no longer have to buy a map sensor. The Terminator X has a 1-bar, but again, for forced induction applications, that's not gonna work. And then we do have a oscilloscope, which is not available on the Terminator X. That is only available on the HPs and the Dominators. And then we have, you know, your 5-volt. I'm guessing their 8-volt is the same thing as the Holley's 12-volt and your sensor ground. So that's just for wiring in your additional sensors. For features, we have Easy Setup Wizard. Man, I don't like that terminology. That's just using word for word what Holley's doing. It's a little bit dirty. It does do drive-by-wire, flex fuel. The knock control on this, in theory, I haven't used it, but I'm guessing it's going to be better than Holley's. I'm not a huge fan of Holley's knock control. No variable cam control. Here it is, auto trans coming soon. And then here's another one, long-term learning. So it has a learn table. Again, I don't necessarily like them using the exact same wordage that Holley does. On that note, I did find this article here. I guess this is where they were interviewing somebody from Haltech at PRI or SEMA, whatever the hell, is this paragraph right here. You don't actually have to connect the ECU to a PC to use it. You can and you should at some point. And this is what I'm always talking about with the Holley stuff, is the Wizard is great to get you up and running, but you're leaving so much on the table if you're not actually diving into the laptop-based software. You can do so much more. So it appears that Haltech is essentially on the same page as I am. Is, you know, in this case, you'd be using their phone app rather than the 3.5-inch touchscreen. Get yourself up and running, and then eventually get yourself into the laptop-based software. And then we have all this other stuff that you can read all that, but basically you can kind of do all that with Holley. This is a little bit interesting, is this does say that it has traction control, but then it does not have drive shaft and engine RPM targeting. So you're probably just gonna have, like, I'm guessing front versus rear wheel speed percentage difference, but you're not gonna be able to actually like drive on a curve like you would with the way Holley does their traction control, which is very recently a paid upgrade that is now available for the Terminator X. You've always been able to do some kind of make your own kind of traction control type stuff. So again, for an entry-level ECU, not a deal breaker there, but just something to keep in mind. And then if you read on their site, it says that they're trying to have this ready by the end of the year. I already touched on this, how it looks like one of their other R-Series ECUs. This is kind of a nice touch where it says this is going to basically work with all of their other CAN-based stuff. So it says you can use up to 4 of their PDM-16s. It says they plan to include auto trans in 2024. No plans for other engines other than LS's, and at pricing not yet to be confirmed, but from what I've heard, like I said, it's about 1,500 bucks. All right, let's quickly dive into the software. We'll just take a look at a couple of things and then we'll wrap this one up. All right, if you've never used Haltech software before, then you have exactly the same amount of experience as I do.
I can't wait to get home and spend my whole night trying to figure the goddamn thing out.
Right off the get-go, all of these icons up at the top, a lot of these appear to just be basic Windows commands like copy and paste and stuff like that. So I like the way that Holley laid their stuff out a little bit better. And then we have these like drop-down tree things here. Which again, I like the way Holley does this better, but there's so much more stuff within this software that, I don't know, the way they did it isn't the worst, but they do have this here, which I like a lot, where you can essentially enable and disable a bunch of stuff. So if you're not using knock, then you can just turn it off and then it's gonna take it away from this tree. But you can see just how much more stuff that there is. And each one of these things that you can enable then has drop downs like down from there. So there's a way more stuff in here. Another thing that if we go all the way over here, you can see that we actually have like warnings and diagnostics, which is really nice. I will say though that it seems like every car that I've ever had come onto the dyno with Haltech, they always have error codes, and it's almost always for like cam and crank, and I guess they're getting the codes like while the engine is actually starting. So basically like the warning is always on that there's an error, and when that happens, then you just kind of like, it gets to the point where you just almost ignore it altogether. So I haven't had a Haltech car on the dyno in a really long time, so I don't know if maybe that's been cleared up or what, but either way, having the actual error messages I think is a nice touch. So this does use a VE based fuel model, and a lot of the axes and stuff are all like adjustable. So if you right click, you get all kinds of different stuff. You can change all the breakpoints and the different axis types. There's way more adjustability. Holley kind of locks you in on a lot of stuff, which is in a lot of instances for your own good. And then if we push this D key here, it gives us different views. And if you've ever tuned like a VAFC, I guess you can do that here. Then we also have quick lambda, which if you've ever used like Motec is nice. So basically, like if you're driving in a cell, well, this is our lambda table, it would be here in our main fuel table. But if you're driving in a cell and there's a 4% difference in fueling, if you just press Q while you're in that cell, then it'll make the adjustments for you. That's actually a nice touch. I wish Holley had that. One thing that I kind of don't like, but I do, I think this is like one of those things, like everybody thinks they can make their own ECU better, which is why there's so many ECU companies. But I love that Holley's layout is fixed and it's exactly the same on every car, but when you get into these, like you can move all of this stuff around. So you can see there's stuff like hidden behind this. And if you've ever used like AEM, each time you move one of these things, then you go to like the next page, it gives you this warning if you want to save it. So, but it does give you this option to set up your like multiple pages. So you can have 20 different pages for all sorts of different things. So that part is nice. So I think if I was to do my own ECU, like this main one would be fixed just like Holley is, and then we would have these additional pages for the stuff that we wanted to look at. So not a deal breaker, but it's annoying when you like log into somebody else's computer and it's laid out totally different. You don't know where anything else is. Now this is something that I've asked Holley to do, which they haven't done yet. So they just, in one of the recent updates, gave us this where we click on this open space here, it'll highlight the whole table. What I've also asked them to do that this does, which is nice, is if you click over here, like on 0, it highlights that whole row, or if you click here, it'll highlight this whole column. That's a nice touch, but I haven't found a way to just make the table bigger, so it's annoying when like the whole thing isn't visible. So like some other ECUs, you just push a button and it becomes like full screen. So it might be there, I just don't know how to do it. And then you could always just do like another tab here and make it full size or whatever. Even then it looks like it might not fit on the screen. Now we do have a compare map feature, which Holley does as well. So that's nice, and Jesus, sometimes the way I label things is kind of wild, but it looks like when you save a map or create a map that it will actually put everything into a folder for you, which is nice. Holley just kind of dumps it into their like generic Holley directory, so I like that. But a lot of the big difference is going to be in the setup on a lot of this stuff. So you can see that just here in the idle control, there's like significantly more adjustability. And you're going to actually be setting up all of your closed loop stuff. And here's all your PID for the idle control. And here's the ignition control, which is a little bit nice. Holley's is fixed at like 8 degrees, but it looks like you can change these to whatever you want them to be. And it gives you wiring examples kind of here within the software, which I think is nice. And then for boost control, we have open and closed loop. And then you can control it off of manifold pressure or wastegate pressure. So there's a whole bunch more adjustability within the boost control stuff. So a lot of the stuff is going to be set up like more for you, but when once you get like into those folders, there's going to be a lot more adjustability from there. So you can just like this whole thing here just gives you a way better look as to how much stuff is in here. And like say some of the terminology can be a little bit weird. Like I had no idea what zero demand was, which apparently is just like idle. Looking at these RPM breakpoints and stuff. And it looks like if we hit F1, it'll bring us to the help menu, which is awesome. Most ECUs do that, but it looks like this does a pretty good job at it. You click on like vehicle functions. You can see there's just some different cool stuff. I don't know necessarily how much of all this will be functional in this entry-level ECU, but it might work. And then it appears that the data logger, here's what I was talking about, how you have to actually choose all of the channels. And you can see here that this list of channels is just infinitely long. So you need to, set all of this up if you want to see it. So if you don't set it up, then it's not going to log it. And then it looks like we can trigger the log as well, which is good. Now I didn't even see like a sample data log on here that I can open up, but from what I remember seeing, the Haltech data logger, it's a little kind of clunky, and I'm used to the Holley stuff, so from what I've seen, I would say that I prefer the Holley's logger, but if I got more familiar with this, my opinion on that totally could change. But I definitely like that Holley logs all of the channels for you. So I think that's enough of looking at this software. Obviously, you can go and dig through all of this yourself if you just download the NSP software on Haltech's website. Oh, another thing that is nice here, if you go into help, there's remote help, so they can log in directly to your computer. And it actually will auto check for updates, which can be good or bad. And luckily it does have the disable the automatic updates. Sometimes that can cause problems. And you can, like I say, you can configure all this stuff however you want, but usually it just ends up looking like a big, huge mess. So I kind of like the fixed layouts more often than not. So if you just come into Haltech's website, go to downloads, and here's the NSP software. I'm sure once this software, the actual software becomes available, there'll be something additional thing here, but this will at least give you somewhat of a look at what the software looks like. You can just click download here. Probably not the greatest tour of the software, but again, I'm not super familiar with it. I do think that it's going to be a bit more difficult to navigate for a lot of people compared to the Terminator X software. But once you get used to it, you might find that you like the extra adjustability. So in conclusion, I think this is a pretty interesting kind of situation that we're in. And considering that we got multiple companies now all trying to compete for the same customer, so to speak, that competition can drive cool things to happen. So I'm excited to see where this goes. I think it's gonna be pretty difficult for Haltech to put a dent in what Holley's kind of got going on, especially in this area. Like every single car has Holley in it. And I probably get like 3 phone calls per year for Haltech, which is why I'm not very familiar with it. So who knows, if it becomes super popular, then maybe we'll play with it a little bit more, but we're just gonna kind of have to see where it works out. So you do get a couple more inputs and outputs with the Haltech. The harness is got some features that maybe are a little bit nicer. You got the whole wireless thing if you're into that. The 4-bar map sensor is nice, the internal logging is nice. The ability to add some of the additional CAN components is nice. I think it's really kind of going to come down to the software, and if you're willing to either learn the Haltech software or pay somebody to do it. At the end of the day, I think they're both going to kind of do the same thing. There's just kind of different ways to go about doing it, but I think with both options they're going to be great for a lot of people, and it will be interesting to see how popular, if at all, the Haltech stuff becomes. So I'll probably try and get my hands on one of these ECUs just to play with it, become familiar with it, just in case it does explode and become super popular, and I need to be able to tune these things. So I'm not a Haltech dealer, so I'm not even sure where I would get one, but all right, so as of right now, that's about all that I know about this Haltech ECU. So I guess if it becomes popular and we get 1,000 people knocking on the door wanting their stuff tuned, then maybe we will do some more videos on these. Or if Holley still continues to dominate the world and this ECU doesn't take off, then who knows, there might not be a whole lot more. But as always, I appreciate you watching, and I'll see you next time.